ahead.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for showing up this late in the day, or in Dr. Flav's case, early. Today we have Dr. Flavia Fayet-Moore from the Food IQ Global Group. She is a uh, registered nutritionist, accredited practicing dietitian, and board-certified lifestyle medicine professional, and and adjunct lecturer at the University of Newcastle. So she's got a lot going on for her,
This
and that
meeting
is
is
what.
being recorded.
Okay. And she's also helping out with the mission MushVroom, which I'm very excited to hear about because it is oyster mushrooms in space. And that just makes sense. But she'll tell you more about why we're going to do that. And on to you.
Awesome. So, hello, everyone. Thanks so much for the invitation to be here. I am coming to you from the future, so it's not a mistake on my slide. June 25th. It is the next day in Australia. So, thanks for joining in your evening, and hopefully you're having a nice cup of tea or something to watch the presentation. Because it is about food, and sometimes when you talk about food, at least when I research food, it does make me hungry. So, as Donald introduced myself already, I want to just give a little bit more context on why I'm here, why space. And so, I've been in the field of nutrition science for more than 20 years. So, I remember as a student when you start counting, you're like 2 years experience, 5 years. And then now you're like, you get at 20 and you stop counting probably until you get to 30. And then you probably stop counting altogether because it just shows your age. And then you probably become redundant then. But I remember being where you are. And I want to give you guys lots of insights on career pathways and kind of help put more nutrition in space. So, nutrition affects every single body, every single system. It's something that we do every day and we do multiple times a day. So, it's an applied science and it touches really most fields of life sciences, of human health that exist out there. So Donald said that I work for Food IQ Global. I founded the company 16 years ago, and what we do food and nutrition research, and then we do the communication and translation of that research as well, which I'll touch on in my presentation because I think it's really important to do science, but we need to close that gap between science and impact because it's about 15 years before it gets implemented. So we need to communicate and translate that science a little bit better to get the uptake that we want to see. I've also been researching nutrition of and health of mushrooms for about 7 years now, and hence the connection to Mission Mushroom in space. And the reason why I got into space is because before I was 20, I had my pilot's license and scuba diving license. I love adventure. I love seeing what's out there in the horizon, and space was just the perfect way to bring the two together. So I talk about the future of food a lot in keynotes that I give, and space was very much part of it. So once I worked on a paper with Trish, I realized I absolutely love space and I want to add more nutrition to space and went to ISU. So during my ISU program, that's when I had the idea. Mushrooms are the perfect space crop. I can't believe we're not growing it on the ISS yet. How is this happening? We got to get it out there because it ticks a lot of boxes. So I'm going to tell you about the mission and also the context of why mushrooms from a nutrition and health perspective as well. Now, when I start presentations, I love to recap that nutrition science is such a new science. So the first vitamin was isolated less than 100 years ago, just to put it into context. So medicine, more than 2,000 years, some argue even more. Nutrition, really less than 100 years. Now, the first vitamin that was ever discovered was not vitamin C. A lot of people think it was vitamin C, but it was this vitamin that causes beriberi. Beriberi was characterized as a disease of paralysis, and no one knew what caused it. At the time, there was germ theory, everything was caused by germs, and they completely overlooked that food was the cause of the disease. Eventually, it was discovered it was thiamine or vitamin B for beriberi, given the first vitamin to be discovered, which then led, it was more than almost 300 years later that it was actually discovered. So why do I tell this story? A, because nutrition's so new, remember that. There's a lot we're discovering at the moment, and it's accelerating what we're discovering. But two, when you have another perspective on things, it helps you make discoveries. And that's where space fits in. Space forces us to think differently. It's a different environment where everything behaves differently. And it allowed us, instead of thinking germ theory, that is the cause of the disease, we realized it was actually food. Similarly, in space right now with SANS, nobody knows what causes SANS. And Scott Smith's group at NASA, Sarah Zwart and Scott, think that potentially it might be actually nutrition. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides. So I invite you to think about nutrition a little bit more, realizing that we eat every day, multiple times a day. We need it on Earth for a sustainable future. And space is going to help us make those discoveries to make us healthier, but also to figure out how we're going to feed a growing population of 10 billion by 2050. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with RIDGE, right? The space environment. So I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of how nutrition fits in with RIDGE. So when it comes to radiation, we know that radiation oxidizes things, it oxidizes cells. It can increase our requirements for different nutrients, but it can also affect food packaging. It can affect crops, which are being researched because of that, because it helps us make new discoveries, new varieties. It affects their genetics. But it also might mean that we have varying nutritional needs in microgravity as well, or with varying gravity fields. With isolation and confinement, food is culture. Food is so important for our mental health and well-being, and often in space, it's not prioritized for that reason. And we published a paper with Trish a few years ago showing that nutrition plays a huge role for nutritional psychiatry, especially as we go deeper into space and live and are living in the space environment longer. But there's also that isolation and confinement limits how much food we can take. It limits how much food we can grow. And it even, when you're thinking of the whole food system from growing all the way to disposal of the packaging and the end product of eating, it's important we think of the whole food system in that isolated, confined environment as well. And the distance from Earth, of course, means we can't have as much of a variety and as much of fresh food that we have on Earth, which is super important for psychological well-being. The packaging changes. We need to think about how long the food can last for because, nutrients degrade. They're not there forever in food. Neither are supplements. Supplements go off. If anyone's ever had an olive oil or any oil sitting in their cupboard for a long time and they try it, it's gone rancid, you can taste it. It's not very pleasant, right? So we need to really work on the food tech side of things as well to make sure that food is delicious. Because even high-performing astronauts, if it's not tasty, it's not going to be eaten, just like on Earth. So the next is gravity fields. We have very little research on the effect of varying gravity fields on the whole food system and on the human body. We have Leo, and there's, of course, we're going to move towards the gravity fields on the moon and potentially Mars. We don't know what the effect is from a nutrition perspective in those settings. So we also know that taste changes in the space environment. Things don't taste as good. We don't have as much of the sensitivity to sweet taste, to bitter taste. Umami, which is a fifth basic taste, is one that's more well retained. But we drink and eat food differently. We sit around the table differently around food. All that is really important to think about in that changed environment. And then, of course, being closed, there's limited variety that we can have. Right now, we don't have cooking or processing facilities in microgravity. We need to minimize inputs. We need to minimize outputs in the space environment. And of course, two things for you to think about is that recycled air. And I'll touch on that in a bit as well. And also the lack of green space. Luckily for me, I can walk out of my office and I'm in green space. So it's really important to take that aspect of the food system as well, because growing food and having that greenery is really important for human health and well-being as well. So what does the roadmap for nutrition research look like? You can actually go to the Human Research Roadmap on the NASA's website and search nutrition. And you can see all the different projects that have been done and are currently being done if you're interested in knowing more. And of course, there's two reports done by Scott Smith's group that are great, that give you all the insights and all the gaps and opportunities for research as well. So highly recommend reading those. So what about the actual food system? What are the requirements? What do we need? So this is an adapted image of Grace Douglas's diagram of the space food system. A lot of research and a lot of effort gets put on the left-hand side, but not so much on the right-hand side. So this is where we need more research on nutrition. How do we meet nutritional needs? How do we ensure that the nutrients are stable, that the food is stable, that it's still tasty, it hasn't gone off, and we get enough variety? Because variety is a great predictor of food intake. And in a space environment, everyone gets anorexia, so they lose their appetite. And there's multiple factors that influence that, but variety helps increase appetite, it helps increase food intake. And right now, we don't have a shelf-stable, nutrient-dense, palatable, varied food system that takes into account the needs of the different cultures and the different preferences that people have. So it's a huge opportunity to develop that food system. So what are the opportunities for microgravity research? I want to just showcase a few. I'll just show a few research papers to get your taste for nutrition and microgravity research, but then feel free to reach out if anyone has any questions beyond what we get to in the Q&A as well. So I briefly mentioned taste, flavor, and appetite regulation. That's really important. We're underutilizing as well the power of herbs and spices from that human health perspective. From nutrient requirements, I'll touch on that. It's a big problem here on Earth and in space. The bioactives, the brain, gut, immune, skin axis, which I've published quite a bit on as well. Genetic variability, individual preferences, real-time monitoring that we can adapt nutrition for. And then, of course, I'll touch on space crops, and then that's where I'll talk about mushrooms and Mission Mushroom. So from meeting basic nutritional needs, where we know that in space right now we are not, there's a lot of nutrients that are underconsumed, compromised vitamin D status, there's increased oxidative damage. There's quite a few buckets that we are lacking in terms of meeting nutritional status in space. Also, the food is not meeting nutritional status. It's not meeting our requirements even before it goes up to space. So we have a real problem there because we need to do a lot more research on getting that food system right before we venture out for longer duration in the space environment. So you can see here calcium, vitamin D, vitamin K are some that even before it's stored, it's already not giving the amount that astronauts need, which is not surprising for me because I've been researching in micronutrients for 20 years. And we've recently published in the US, hot off the press, this month, 21 out of 24 micronutrients are underconsumed among the US population. In Australia and New Zealand, it's a similar thing. Globally, it's similar. Harvard published that a couple of years ago as well, or last year. It's a big problem. We are not meeting nutritional needs, and it's not one or two, it's multiple. So I think there needs to be a better connection between Earth and space research when it comes to nutrition so we can solve those challenges together. Because if we're not even meeting nutritional status on Earth, how in the world are we going to meet them in the space environment, which adds all those other challenges? Now, there's also a huge underestimation of the role of bioactives in food. So bioactives are your non-nutrients. It's typically called phytochemicals. I don't like those terms because it's a molecule that has bioactive activities. They can be good or bad. Many in food are actually quite beneficial. Now, this paper was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition more than 20 years ago, basically when I graduated from university. And at the time, they mentioned that the antioxidant capacity of an apple is mostly explained by the bioactives. Vitamin C only explained 0.4% of the antioxidant capacity of that apple. So we know now, yes, nutrients are important to prevent deficiencies, but we're moving on in nutrition science that we know the role that bioactives have are super important. So we need more of that in space research. Now, we also published a paper looking at the role of these compounds, the pigments that are bioactive in fruits and vegetables, and their role in health. And as you can see here, this is an umbrella review, so systematic literature review of randomized controlled trials and epidemiological evidence showing that there's multiple benefits from lowering risk of type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, high-grade evidence that dark color in fruits and vegetables independently have a benefit to human health. And it goes above and beyond the fact that they're eating more fruits and vegetables. So it's one area to look at and potentially leverage that for space health. Another potential area is on air nutrition. So I published a perspective last year in Advances in Nutrition, talking about how we do absorb nutrients from air. We absorb it more effectively than we do from the gut. Not only can we absorb it more effectively, but we can absorb molecules that are from nanoparticles to 260 times bigger than what the gut can absorb. So it's an untapped area in terms of nutrition and health. I wrote a conversation article about it as well. You can read it. There's been an editorial about our paper. This was covered in New Scientist last month. It's an emerging area for more research. So there's four potential routes of uptake of these aeronutrients that are found potentially in nature. So we've developed systems to absorb molecules from air quite efficiently, as we've seen with a lot of drug delivery, intranasal delivery. So there's plenty of evidence and research showing that vitamin B12 delivered intranasally is almost as effective as an IV and 10 times more effective than orally. So there's a real opportunity to look at potentially some of the delivery of nutrients in the space environment might not be from food. It might actually come potentially from the air that's in the space station, a spaceship, or wherever humans are living. Now, another example of the research on this is iodine. So on the figure on the left, this is the average urinary iodine levels in children who were from an inland, coastal, or coastal town with high seaweed. Atmospheric iodine was much higher in the areas with high seaweed. So seaweed is very rich in iodine, for those that don't know. And you can see here, not only is the median intake much higher, but the prevalence of adequate intakes much higher. And the contribution of that respiration to iodine intake range anywhere from 20% to almost 40%. So it can make a significant contribution potentially for some nutrients, but it's a whole area that we need to do more research, and the space environment is perfect, right, to do that because it's mostly closed. Now, the other aspect of air nutrition is the aeromicrobes. And we know from research just published this year that on the ISS, the beneficial microbes are limited. So we need to potentially do more research on how the air or aerobiome, the aeromicrobes can influence the gut. And there's a lot of research that in forest, in natural environments, the composition of those aeromicrobes are much more beneficial than they are in rural or urban areas. So there's much more I can talk on that, but just to whet your appetite on this. The other one, another area that I've been working in for many years as well, is personalized nutrition. So every single baby born in the world gets a nutrigenetic test done. So it's for PKU, phenylketonuria, and that's just an inborn error of metabolism. All you've got to do is avoid the phenylalanine, and then you're fine. And that's a genetic test done in every single baby basically born in the world. So as the nutrition science moves on and personalized nutrition moves on, there's a lot more SNPs or single nucleotide polymorphisms that we know that influence our nutritional status. And it's all about the nutrient gene interaction. It's not an absolute risk relationship. It really means when you alter your diet, then it impacts your nutritional status, and vice versa. Potentially the gene impacts what you actually consume. So these are some examples of known SNPs that we have. And I mentioned SENS of the STAR and Scott Smith's group, and the other one is MTRR. So what they found is that there's an association, particularly when folate status is low pre-flight, that you're more likely to develop SENS. And it's very similar to celiac disease. We know there's different SNPs with celiac disease that when people have it, it doesn't mean they'll get it, but something triggers them to get it because 99% of people with that SNP have celiac disease, right? So having the gene doesn't mean you'll get it, but you need that interaction that something happens to then get the disease. And it's quite interesting because 30% of the population have that celiac gene, but only 1% actually develop celiac disease. So it's quite an interesting area potentially to research more. And that's where I think, when we add the space environment, we're adding a different dimension to human health, to nutrition science, because it allows us to make some of those discoveries that perhaps we might have not made if we're just doing human health and nutrition research here on Earth. So the papers are all there, and I'm happy to share my presentation slides as well. So now moving on to crops and space crops and why do we want to research them? Well, we want to research crops because A, it's going to help us, improve our agricultural methods here on Earth with different discoveries that we can have in the space environment from different genetic polymorphisms that we discover to different types of plants that can grow. And there's just so much that can be done from that, minimizing resources, minimizing water, recycling nutrients that we can apply and put those farms anywhere in the world, especially where people don't have access to nutritious, palatable foods that are varied that are going to influence their health. So I love mushrooms. They're not a vegetable. Unfortunately, we call them veggies, but they're not. They're actually fungi, and they're genetically more similar to us humans than they are to plants. So we incorrectly classify them in dietary guidelines as veggies. They should really sit in their own food group, in their own kingdom, because they do have quite unique nutritional composition and bioactive compositions, and they have a huge impact on human health. What was the aha moment for me when I was doing the space program at ISU and at the same time I knew all this about mushrooms is the vitamin D. So what's interesting is that in the space environment, we can't make vitamin D through our skin. So most humans on Earth expose their skin to the sun, and 7-dehydrocholesterol gets converted into active vitamin D by the body. But in space, with the radiation, the UV radiation comes other radiation that potentially lethal. So there is no way to get vitamin D from the sun. So the only way is really through diet or supplements. Now, not many foods are rich in vitamin D, and it's only animal foods because the animal has already made the vitamin D, and it's usually egg yolks and fatty fish. And we know that those are foods probably that we're not going to have in the space environment because we're not going to have chickens running around and potentially fish. So this is where we know that the vitamin D intake is inadequate in the food supply in space, and that's why astronauts are supplemented with 1,000 IUs. And at the same time, it's also to prevent bone-associated or space-induced bone-associated losses, because when status is low, it exacerbates the bone loss. So you want to make sure that the vitamin D status is adequate because it does help with bone loss and being a countermeasure to bone loss. Now, this is where mushrooms come in, right? So just like our skin, because they're fungi, not plants, they have the precursor or ergosterol to vitamin D. And so basically, just like our skin, UV exposed mushrooms, especially the gill, where there's greater surface area, more vitamin D is made. It produces 1,000 IUs, which is the equivalent of the supplement that's currently being given to the astronauts. Now, a lot of people go, well, is it as effective as a supplement? And yes, it is. So UV exposed mushrooms have been shown to be literally, it follows the same curve, just as effective as a supplement in increasing vitamin D status. And we've also just published, hot off the press, we added vitamin D mushrooms to an aged care facility here in Australia. And we found that we moved from 0% of residential care residents meeting their vitamin D to 75%. And in the independent living, 100% started meeting. It was from one serve, 75 grams of UV exposed mushrooms added to their meals. So we know that it does increase, we know that it's feasible, and hence why it's one way to tick that box when it comes to nutrition for spaceflight. And there's a YouTube video there you can click on and watch talking about the research for those that know, because we've translated that science so we can get it to more people adding vitamin D mushrooms to their menus. Now, from a nutrition and health, I talked about vitamin D, but there's also the unique bioactives. So mushrooms have not only the nutrients that are found across food groups that you'd expect in veggies, but it also has certain nutrients that are found in meats and found in nuts. And then bioactives like glutathione, which is the master antioxidant in the body, and also ergothioneine. Now, ergothioneine is interesting because there is no frank deficiency. You're not going to get a disease from not having enough, but we can only get it from diet. Mushrooms is the largest source. It blows every other food source out of the water. And we have specific receptors for ergothioneine in the body, and it's highly conserved. So there's definitely a need for it. We just don't know really what the deficiency of it or where the recommended requirements are. And then we also published a paper looking at the health, nutrition, and health benefits of mushrooms, and quite a few health benefits relate to the space environment, like improved immune function, lower inflammation, improved satiety, gut health, heart health, and so on. So there's definitely a role for that vitamin D, but then there's all those other nutrients that are found in high amounts that aren't found in any other single vegetable. So it is quite unique because there's no other vegetable like it that will provide the amount of nutrition that mushrooms do. And hence why you probably tell like I'm super passionate about it. So there's more to it. As I said, 25% of daily intake of quite a few nutrients. That we're not talking 2%, 5%. It's 10%, 25, and 100. And the other thing is that umami. So mushrooms are very rich in the umami, the fifth basic taste, and it helps enhance flavor, which helps enhance consumption. But from a space environment perspective, it lowers the amount of sodium that you need to add to space food. So if you have mushrooms on the menu and blended with whatever meal that you're providing the astronauts, you can reduce sodium by 25% while still retaining the palatability. And this is important because every time sodium is reduced in their food, it doesn't taste very good, and we need it as a countermeasure to bone loss. We want to keep sodium really low because it exacerbates calcium losses. So as you've seen, it's, hits the vitamin D, there's a combo of nutrients, the bioactives, umami, salt reduction, and it's a whole food. And so we know that we want to prioritize whole food over supplements because of those bioactive benefits, because of the eating occasion benefit and the psychological countermeasure that comes with eating food and not just popping supplements. So these are the 10 ways that I believe that mushrooms are the ultimate space crop. It closes that loop in plant agriculture. So potentially you can use spent mushroom substrate as fertilizer to grow more plants. It needs minimal inputs. You can use human waste, urine and feces to grow mushrooms. It grows basically on anything containing carbon. It can grow in small spaces. It doesn't need to photosynthesize. It's able to grow in microgravity. It doubles in size every day. So your Swiss brown mushroom and your portobello are the same mushroom. They're from the Agaricus bisporus family. And that portobello was just harvested 2 days later. So that's how quickly mushrooms grow. And we know with some plants, it takes, months to get that crop. So it's about 45-day, cycle for some mushrooms, depends on the species. But they complement plants in space. There's all those benefits that I spoke about, but plants also give that green space, the aesthetic as well, that's important. It produces oxygen, which is of course really important, and absorbs CO2. So it's a complementary system. And I believe that the future of the space food system and space agriculture will need to have both to tick all the boxes that we need. Now, I'll just briefly talk about our mission. You're probably all waiting to hear more about this. So basically, because I have been talking about mushrooms as a space crop and I presented it at IAC in Milan last year, and then this opportunity came about because I'm a member of the Space Industry Association of Australia. An EOI came out asking, does anyone have any ideas for experiments that fit these dimensions, this weight? And I was like, yes. Can grow mushrooms, and basically did the EOI. 2 days later, SpaceX called going, we love the idea. Can we hear more about it? Then I met with them again. And then within like a few days, it was congratulations, you're on the From2 mission. So it was really insane. It just shows how accessible space research can be and is, especially as we have private space now. So, I think whatever dream you have, believe in it and work towards it. Don't worry about the how, because I would have never imagined how mushrooms were going to be sent to space for our experiment, but it happened. So I think it's really about having that vision and believing in your vision, because then things line up and they happen. Now, of course, worked very hard to get into that stage, but just keep working hard, but have a vision. So this is our mission patch for Mission MushVroom. It's a nod to the From2, which was the first time that humans have gone to the polar orbit. And that's the From ship, the original ship to go to the polar ice caps here on Earth. We're doing this for the long duration missions, so the nod to the moon and Mars. And of course, the flume of the rocket turns into oyster mushrooms because we sent oyster mushrooms. So it's the first to grow mushrooms as a crop. There are a couple of studies that were done previous in inedible and then inoki, which is edible as well, from a foundational science perspective, but not for nutrition and health and not for growing food. So it's very exciting to do that. And of course, it's the first time oyster was sent and also first time sporeless. So we were able to send sporeless mushrooms. And the team was Ralph and Annie, which many of you know Annie, of course, hence why I'm here with the connection to present to you. So we worked really hard on getting this together. And thanks to Ralph's expertise, who I met when I was doing my program, he introduced me to Annie, and it was just like a sister from another mister with us. We really worked really well together. Annie did all the pre-flight testing, everything that we needed, because she was based in Florida, I'm based in Australia. We had a lot of constraints to make this mission happen. So the objective is really we want to see if oyster mushrooms can grow, if they can, the mycelium can continue to colonize. So the mycelium, for those that don't know, is the fungus, is the organism, and the mushroom is the fruit of the organism. So it's how it replicates itself. So the mycelium is that white network, is the fungus, is the organism, and then as it's ready to replicate, it produces the mushroom, which then spores are released and it replicates into more mycelium. And so we really wanted to determine, does it continue to colonize the mycelium in the microgravity environment? Whether sending pre-pinned oyster mushrooms, pre-pinned is just as they're starting to grow, do they continue to grow and flourish in the space environment? And then is there anything else? Is there any physical changes in how they grow, any of the biochem, the nutritionals and genetics that are different? So to give you kind of our constraints, it was really a very quick experiment that we had to do. We didn't have a lot of time. Someone pulled out and we were filling a gap. So we were already behind all the other experiments that were on the front too, because we just got in. We had the geographical limitations as well, the size and weight limitations. It's not an optimized environment for growing mushrooms, but we made it happen, right? So we sent it, and the data collection was on day 3 of a 3.5-day flight. And Life Cycle, who's an Australian company that also has production in the US, provided all the substrate and mycelium for us to make this work. So we're super thankful for Life Cycle, who are really leaders in this field. And the materials that we sent were 6 falcon tubes colonized with the substrate and mycelium, and also a block, because in terms of space, that's all we had. So we did the science on the falcon tubes. Then we're like, I wonder if we can actually get mushrooms in space. So we did lots of pre-flight testing. There's any. This is what the block looked like, and that's what the little oyster mushrooms were looking like. So we had 2 cuts that we made on the block. So there are 2 places that it could have grown. And it had to, of course, be fully sealed and covered, and hence the plastic around it. Now, the experiment is really just to do in-flight photos and videos. That's our ground photo. And here's a photo with Eric holding our mushroom block in microgravity. So right now it's splashed down. I can confirm that we did get mycelium colonization. We did get growth in space, but we didn't send it fully pre-pinned due to lots of different reasons. It got sent earlier than the stage we wanted. So we got baby mushrooms. We didn't get the full-blown mature mushrooms that we wanted to. It was a short mission, and perhaps if it stayed a little bit longer, couple days, we might have gotten the full mature mushrooms. But it grew well. So it's really exciting. And it looks like there's some physical differences in the mycelium in microgravity versus on Earth. So I will be presenting these analyses at IAC in Sydney, Australia this year. So I hope to see some of you there. And feel free to come and pick my brain on anything nutrition or mushrooms that you like. So we're doing, of course, the weight, the growth, the nutrient profile from both the mycelium and the little mushrooms we got, the bioactive profile, and so on. So that's kind of the analysis that we're doing right now. And I wanted to touch on also the media that we got. I think the translation of the research. So 2 things. We were very successful with the media that we got because we did a media release packaged in the way that media enjoy. But at the same time, we had a little summary brochure about the experiment. We had a landing page on the website. We did the translation and the communication of it to make it really easy. But also food is a really nice way to make space relevant because people can relate. Everyone eats food and you can just walk to your supermarket or grocery store and buy mushrooms and reap the same benefits as the astronauts would reap in space. So I think making it relevant is really important and translating the research that you're doing, that you're working on to the general public is important as well as to other researchers across different fields, right? Because there's a lot of magic that can happen when you present cross, interdisciplinary, because there's things that you think about that perhaps you take for granted that the other researchers might not know of. So we got huge media coverage both in Australia and the US from CBS, NPR, Food and Wine. Like it was a huge coverage, 1.4 billion reach. And I think the reason for that is because we just translated the research. We made it relevant to people and to the masses, really. So just encourage you, don't stop at just publishing the paper, then communicate your science. Let everyone know about it. And there's so many ways now that we can do that. So what's next? I mentioned that we're presenting at IAC this year. So if you're there, reach out. But there's over 2,000 edible varieties of mushrooms that exist. So oyster is just one variety. We can explore lots of different varieties. We can also just need to improve on the mushroom growing system, right? To grow more of the oyster mushrooms and get it down packed. We can look at, technology to help with the harvesting and monitoring of the mushroom growth, the spawn, which is the seed, how do we instigate it in long duration missions? Of course, doing more CO2 monitoring and testing, just like as humans, mushrooms breathe or fungi breathe. So we need to keep that CO2 level as low as possible. Do more on the substrate research. There's lots of different substrates we can use. It can be grown on cotton t-shirts, which Annie's group, Anasa, researched on. And you can also do a lot more research here in Leo on vitamin D status using mushrooms, adding it to space food or having it growing and eaten as a crop in space. And of course, do some, genetics in microgravity to see what are the changes, how is mycelium adapting to the space environment, and what can we learn to grow potentially mushrooms here on Earth to feed that growing population. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope that I can answer all your questions that you have now. But if there's any other questions that don't get answered, feel free to reach out. My email's on the slide, and I'm happy to answer and help support our next generation of researchers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, to everybody else, you are more than welcome to have questions. If you don't have any, I got a huge list.
Um, Hello, this is Dr. Jewel here, and thank you so much. That was a really very fascinating and interesting presentation, Dr. Flav. Can I call you Dr. Flav?
Yes, yes. See, here
Um,
in Australia, everyone shortens your name. So rather than being
oh, really?
Flavia, I just
Yes.
embraced Flav, but Flav is also sounds like flavor, flavonoids. So I like totally embraced it.
Oh, wonderful. It's like a pun, right?
Yeah.
So, so first of all, we actually are working. There's a potential for working with Purdue University in US, and the inventor, he's a professor there, and he's developed a new technology called microponics. And
Yeah.
basically, the technology. So I don't know if you know who he is,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah. So. Um, but I can't say too much about it, but basically you can grow mushrooms without substrate. That's the
Exactly.
technology. And
Yeah.
then suddenly you're able to expedite the growth from seed, planting the seed to actually harvesting the mushroom within 14 days. So you've basically,
Amazing.
increased or decreased the life cycle, right? So you're able to harvest the growth in well, you were saying normally the life cycle of mushrooms is 42 days. Well, this
Yeah.
technology, obviously he has to test it out, and that's where I'm coming in. And I would love to be able to talk to you and about collaborating with you and with
Definitely.
your work. is we deploy missions, analog missions to austere environments. So we're heading to underwater off Florida Keys to do aquanautics, and we are going to be testing, hopefully, this technology in growing mushroom. And we plan to actually stay about two weeks underwater at this underwater habitat. That would be very interesting to bring on board what you're doing and testing also this new technology. And we're definitely interested also in growing mushrooms and incorporating it into our nutrition and diet study. I think personalized medicine or personalized nutrition is absolutely the way to go. And I would love to connect with you and
Yes, please
work
connect.
on this.
They're all really good points. So I think that's the beauty of the space environment, right? So the hydroponics is being developed for space as well. And that solves a few of the problems that potentially we can use here on Earth. I didn't touch on this in the presentation at all, but the other reason for mushrooms as a crop is because it can be made into almost anything, right? So you can use the mycelium block literally as blocks for construction. And there's a potential also for the mushrooms to protect from radiation, certain species. That's also being worked on separately. So there's a lot more applications also for medicine, right? And the precision fermentation and just so many more applications. So I think we'll definitely have fungi in space, like on a permanent basis. And then the plant crops might rotate a bit more. But I think it's really exciting. Hydroponics or mycoponics.
Yeah,
It's you just need more research, right? We need
yeah,
to make it happen. That's all. And determine.
absolutely,
The other thing
absolutely.
for both plants and mycoponics, um, having so much, research in food and ag on Earth, I think it's important that we don't disregard the presence of soil and substrate either. So I know that a lot of space crops are hydroponics, but all the farmers that I speak to on Earth that are doing hydroponics, then their nutritional analysis are not comparable. So there's the microbes in the soil that get into the air. There's potentially the effect on nutrition. So I think it's great that we work on that, but we also make sure we measure what is that effect on the things that we need it for, and we don't take it for granted that it will be there. So I think it's important that we
Mm.
investigate both, right? Not because in nutrition you keep reliving things that happen. It's like fat is bad, and then we're like, oh no, it's not. It's sugar is bad. Well, it's not sugar, it's the company it keeps. And so I think in nutrition there's a lot of that because it's so new. But as we venture into that space food research a bit more, we need to take all the lessons we learn on Earth and make sure we don't relive them in space.
Absolutely, I concur with you. And I just really want to mention, because you're saying mushrooms absolutely have medicinal properties. And so one of the areas we are focusing on is actually using, developing, the psilocybin effect, right, of
Yeah.
mushrooms, and be able
Yeah.
to grow the late term of that is magic mushrooms, but to actually see, can we grow that species in microgravity or in these very altered gravity, like obviously underwater is going to be hyperbaric pressure or we got high
Yeah.
elevation. So can we actually grow these medicinal plants in these environments and then and eventually be able to test it in microgravity in space? So I think the multifunctionality of mushrooms is absolutely correct what you're saying, but I think also for medicinal purposes as well.
Agree.
Excellent. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a quick question. First of all, thank you so much for the presentation. It was super interesting. Uh, I think you briefly mentioned that after you sent the mushrooms to space, you saw some changes in the mycelium or
Yeah.
perhaps the gene expression levels. I was wondering if you could touch on that at all, maybe expound
Yeah,
a
so
little
just
bit.
really briefly, because we're doing all the microscopy and analysis right now, but it looks to be more compact in a space environment. So it seems to be a lot more compact than the Earth samples. It's super
Great.
interesting. Any other questions?
I got one for you. Oh, sorry, Sigrid, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. Hi. Yeah, great talk. That was really fun. So I don't know if you I'm trying to think about fungi growing in space, and I know that there's been a bunch, but the only ones with fruiting bodies that I know were like slime molds. So I don't.
No, I think there was enoki was fruited, I believe,
Uh-huh.
in one of the shuttle missions, I think in 94 or 90 something.
Uh-huh. And what do you
But you're not
know?
gonna eat like the enoki is not really like a food source, right? That's
Right. No, no, no. But just curious in terms of, what's the previous history of fungi in space, and what do you what are you anticipating? Like, were you anticipating it to be more compact, and why? Um,
so yeah, so no, we were just seeing again because we didn't know if oyster mushrooms would do well, if it would actually continue to colonize. So it was very foundational science. Like all the other stuff are bonus. If we can get done, like the nutritionals, everything's a bonus. Right now, it was just kind of proof of concept. Can we get it? It seems to be the best space crop candidate for space. So let's see if we can get mushrooms to oyster mushrooms to colonize and grow. And it was also first time to see sporeless wood. You know, we're like, will it sporeless keep growing in space? And it did. So it just opened up the next stage. The next stage is to then do all those more controlled growing chambers and next studies to see if we can have it in.
so so you said they weren't pinned enough before you actually sent them, but how did they
Yeah.
compare in terms of the development of the fruiting bodies compared
Oh,
to the
the
ground?
so once I mean once it came back to Earth and it continued the growth, it was amazing, you know. And he actually ate some of those mushrooms and said they were epic.
But
So it's
but just in comparison, in terms of the growth, did you have any fruiting body growth in space, or
we
was it
did,
delayed
but it was yeah we did, but it was very small. So they're like little baby mushrooms. And so in terms of the
compared
actual
to the ground?
yes, well compared to the ground, it was much bigger, right, on the ground than in space. So. We're still gathering all our data, so I don't want to say too much preliminary, but basically, it did fruit and it did grow. We probably needed a few more days to get to mature mushrooms.
Cool.
Yeah,
So how long total was the flight?
3.5 days.
Got it.
Yeah, that's why we wanted to send it pre-pinned, right? To get it the right, to get the mature mushrooms in space, given it's such a short mission. And this is in the block, right? So we have the Falcons who is a different the actual blocks.
Sorry.
Let's see.
Excellent. And I was curious, you were talking about, the impacts of translating your research, making it reach a broader audience. Do you have like
Mm.
a couple quick things that you find work really well that are not too difficult to do?
Yeah, I think don't try to say everything. I say 80%. Like I think a lot of people get stuck in the academic writing, which we're like, we got to say everything because it's not 100% correct if I don't say everything. But I'm like, just say less. It's fine. People can ask questions and you can get the other 20% in there somehow, right? When you get the interview with the journalist or when you do a presentation, I think we kind of get stuck in that perfection. It's got to be 100% there. And I think letting go of some of that is really important in science communication to just say the very basic and then the rest can ladder on top as you talk about it and as you present it. So feeling okay of letting go of needing to say everything is important. Also, telling stories whenever you can tell stories of your journey or of how the research came about or humans remember stories, right? We don't remember facts. So I think leveraging storytelling in how you present your research is also really important.
Anybody else?
And if people don't want to ask in the meeting, feel free to get in touch, connect on LinkedIn or get in touch by email is fine.
Of course. Um, this was just a question I thought of, based on what you said with the apples, the antioxidants, most of it not being related to the vitamins. So like if you had to rewrite the standards for nutrition labeling, what would be some of your big changes?
Sorry, I lost the end of your sentence. Can you say
Oh,
it again?
yeah, if you were gonna like had a chance to rewrite the standards for nutrition labeling, what big changes would you make?
That's a loaded question.
I
There's so
know.
many issues with nutrition labeling that I have because nutrition labeling is not like a health labeling. It's really, right now, it's a macronutrient labeling,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So completely, like here in Australia, if you want to say the food contains bioactives, all you can say is contains polyphenols. You can't say anything else. Whereas with everything else in food, you can say lowers cholesterol, or you can make a lot more claims on pack. But I would say I wouldn't even rewrite, like, just unpack. I think it's first educating people to move on from just nutrients, and especially from just the macro. Like protein is so hot right now. It keep jumping around. It's still macronutrients. We're still stuck on the macros. But the micronutrients is what like makes everything work. And they're very non-specific. If you have suboptimal levels of micronutrients, you don't know, right, that it's the micronutrient shortfalls. So I think I'll do education. So educating from children from a very young age, the power of food on health, and that it's the whole food, it's the context of the food, it's not just the nutrients. And I would also talk about the bioactives as just as important as the nutrients. We don't have, or we don't know what it causes, not having enough of these anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anti-proliferative, anti-carcinogenic. So one of my big pet peeves is when people go, "Oh, it contains antioxidants." Like antioxidant is a verb. It's not a noun. So it's antioxidant properties, right? And bioactives have all those properties, right? So it's a bioactive compound or bioactive molecule. And some have antioxidant, but not all. And that's just one property of what makes it so amazing for health. And of course, some of micronutrients have those properties too, like vitamin C, vitamin E, beta carotene, and so on. So there's a lot that we need to change in terms of communicating and educating on food and the power that food has on health. If we start there, then we don't need labeling. I think labeling is confusing. A lot of people don't understand it. It's only a few that actually educated enough to understand it. And it's still only focused on macros. It's not taking into account all the micronutrients and the bioactives that are in food that are
Mm.
beneficial for health.
Love that answer, especially the antioxidants is a verb because it's
Yes.
true. It's a
Not a
verb.
noun. Everyone uses it as a noun. I mean, it's cool that consumers now understand antioxidant. 20 years ago,
Yeah.
they didn't. But I think we need to move on yet again and use proper terminology because it's much more than an antioxidant.
Yeah. Go get some lycopene. There you go. Um,
Yeah. Well, all colors, eat the rainbow and
yeah,
not
yeah.
Skittles
No,
or
not
Smarties.
Skittles. Any last questions before we finish up today?
Question. My name is Angelina. I am just curious about the difference in like a standard diet. Now that you live in Australia, would you say that there was like a major difference between standard American diet and Australian diet?
I can give you two answers, my personal experience and then like population studies, evidence-based. So population studies, they're both really poor. They're very low in fruits and vegetables, in whole grains, in plants, and they're very high. I mean, everyone's debating like what's the best diet and what to eat, but at the end of the day, it's like the candy, the cakes, the chips. It's all that stuff that makes up a third of energy intake. And in the US, I think it's even higher than Australia. So when you think about it, if you're eating just 3 meals a day, one meal is nutrient poor completely. That's a lot on a daily basis. So diets are just really poor all around in Australia, but also in the US. And me personally, the biggest difference, like I did spend a few weeks in Florida for the launch. So for me, it's the lack of fresh food. It's probably the biggest I know here in Australia, and I am, I guess, more privileged as well, right? I have access to fresh fruits and vegetables from farm, from like where I live, you can grow almost anything. So, but there is a real like the food supply here is a lot fresher because a lot we're in an island. Australia is the perfect space analog in so many ways because it's an island. So we grow and eat all our food mostly here. And so there's a you can taste the freshness and the difference because I grew up in Canada as well. And in Canada, you don't grow all food all year for Canada. So there's a big difference in that in the taste of the fresh fruits and vegetables and the access to a variety of fresh fruits and vegetables. But generally speaking, anyone can improve their diet by adding a bit of color to their plate. Just add one color, that's all. And everyone's diet's going to improve a lot by just doing that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And we need that in space too.
So I'm wondering if you've proposed or have thoughts about proposing for like any of the analog missions, some of your hypotheses about aerosol nutrient uptake.
Yes. Well, I have. I'm waiting for a closed analog, like a fully closed. I think there's one that's going to become available soon. But the idea would be to have an environment that's fully enclosed so we know that what's in there is in there and whatever we put in is the impact of what we put in.
Are
But
most
I
of
would love,
them
I mean,
not fully enclosed?
no, because there's still fresh air that's coming from outside that's coming in. I don't think they're 100% from what this is from a conversation I had
Yeah.
last year.
If I can
I
touch on
don't
that,
think
I
they
think
are. Yeah.
last last month we had Kai Stas from Biosphere 2 and the space analog for Moon and Mars.
Yeah.
We can put you in touch with him. He might be able to help with that.
Okay, yeah. I think I would love to do more research on the aeronutrients. I think it's an untapped area and space analog is perfect for it. But we need, of course, I'm not going to do it all on my own, right? They're just ideas. So I'd love it's to collaborate and advise and help make it happen. Because I think
Mhm.
there's a lot, especially plants, like having plants there beyond the nutrition that they can offer, just the molecules that they're emitting in the in air environment that have physiological impact on humans
Well,
and
and the nice
humans.
thing about them is that they can do, you can do not necessarily the experiment within, you could do sequential ones, right? So your experiment when you would be comparing,
Yeah.
from one mission to the next, the presence or
Yeah.
absence of various things. But of course,
But
in
we
your
could also have like a green room, and then people spend time in nature in that green room every day, and there's people that don't, right? So I think we can definitely come up with an experiment to test something as a first off the rank.
Mhm.
Yep. So Dr. Flav, so what I mentioned with our underwater aquanautics analog mission off the Florida Keys is a perfect closed loop system because it's
Yeah,
an underwater
true. It is.
habitat. So would love to be
Yeah,
able to talk about how to test
yeah,
your ideas and your project in
yes.
those missions.
Reach out. I'd love to. Sounds like there's a lot in common that we can do. And also for analogs, for anyone as well leading kind of the food nutrition of it, we can get UV exposed mushrooms in it as well, right? You can do finger prick vitamin D status nowadays, so it's actually quite feasible to do a short-term vitamin D experiment as
Oh,
well, eating.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
because in our missions, we will be taking biological samples. We're going to do dry blood. We're going to take urine, hair, and so that would be so we can incorporate this study into our mission.
amazing. Very cool.
All right. Well, it is 8 o'clock. Dr. Flav has her day to start, and we have to go to bed at some point. So we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you, everybody, for coming out, for Dr. Flav for presenting, and the ISS National Labs for hosting this webinar series. See y'all next month.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.